And we are live. What is going on, everyone? Welcome in to GC Live, this Monday edition. I had plans to go live for my usual Sunday reset yesterday, but unfortunately, it was getting late. Had the girlfriend in town. You know how it works. Anyway, we're getting rolling on this Monday, and I'm
Way to
joined
brag.
by way to brag. Be joined by special guest here, Mike Yuva, who is back in the Columbia area. Am I right on that?
You are, because you picked me up and I said it on 107.5 The Game. I'm going to say it again. I said it to our colleagues. Jack picked me up and he was very nice. Awesome guy. What a great guy. Phenomenal guy. And Jimmy Buffett starts playing. I'm a big Jimmy Buffett guy. Some people don't like Jimmy Buffett. It wasn't just Jimmy Buffett. It was Jimmy Buffett in Spanish. You know, it was Juan Buffett, Jose Buffett. And it was different. But I'll tell you what, if Jack was an Uber, if he was a Lyft driver, I'd give him a solid 4.8.
That's not what the Uber rating you showed me though said. It was like a 1.6 stars.
Well,
I
that
mean,
was earlier. That was early. That was earlier. You improved. There was more rides after that.
and I also had the top down in the Mini Cooper. So I think I set the tone a little bit better. But
I
anyway,
wanted mints. I needed some water. I mean, there no charger for a phone. Just a little
wow.
complimentary stuff. But hey, you know what? All in all, though, I'd recommend it. It was good.
If you need a ride over to Pro Day tomorrow, I will gladly come pick you up, and I'll have
You know what?
everything you need. I'll,
You know
I'll have
what?
your
I might need
Dunkin'
it.
waiting in the car too.
I might need it. Well, you can't get Dunkin' in the South. The South. I mean, they don't know how to do Dunkin'. That's why I've converted to be a Starbucks person in the South. But then again, there's a lot of great local coffee shops too. So support your mom and pop shops in the Columbia area.
Yeah, no, definitely right. Look, Dunkin' around here is nothing too special, but anyway, let's get into our business for the day. We are going to be talking about a lot of things that happened over the weekend, and then most recently today. Head football coach Shane Beamer spoke with the media to preview the start of spring football practice, which is what we're going to talk about first. But before we get into that, got to tell you guys real quick about the main sponsor right above us here on our GC live stream. And if you're listening later, wherever you get your podcasts from, I'm talking about Clint Hammond of CMG Home Loans. If you're in the market to buy a home or you just need help with your mortgage, but you have no idea where to begin, got good news for you. Clint is your guy to get in contact with. He'll take you through the process step by step. He's a lifelong Gamecock fan. He's a longtime supporter of Gamecock Central and all of our GC Live programs. And he's been in the mortgage industry for over 20 years now. So you're in good hands with Clint. If you're interested, give him a call, 803-422-6797. The NMLS number for him is 71597. Or you can go to clinthammond.com for more info. So, Mike, just your initial thoughts from hearing from Shane Beamer today, and what you thought about what he had to say.
Pretty standard Shane Beamer press conference, especially at this time of the year. Competition is going to be the biggest thing that they look at. And I think more than anything, too, you have so many new faces that there's no point of coming out and saying, okay, this guy, that guy, this guy. Now, don't get me wrong. If he's asked a question, which he was, whether it be about the quarterbacks, whether it be about the defensive background, yeah, he'll talk about stuff like that. But at the same time, too, you want to go see guys compete. Because when you talk to the media, you are essentially talking to your team, especially in this era. They're looking at what's going on. They might not watch the entire press conference, but they're reading the press clippings. They know what's being said. I've already heard from some players today about some of the things that Beamer said, not in a negative way, but in just terms of, man, this excites me, or man, I can't wait for this. I'm eager for spring practices, or you know what, he mentioned this part, and I agree with that. So, I mean, that's standard. I mean, that's typical of what usually I hear after a Beamer press conference. But I can tell you right now, Beamer aside, the group of guys that are back, they understand how not just Columbia, but the rest of the nation is viewing them. And I think that there is a strong portion of the country that is looking at them saying, all right, South Carolina, there's a possibility that they could be a college football playoff team this year. But at the same time, too, and I think this is just the reality, and it's fair to say, there's also a portion looking at them saying, okay, every time that this program has took a step forward, and some of this goes back before Beamer was here, goes back to the Muschamp era, they take a step back the following year. And I think it's fair to say just because they have an opportunity to rewrite that narrative, and I think they have the talent to be able to do so. And until you do it, that's why I think it's fair to still say. That's not to say that's how I feel, but I think that's why that narrative is the way that it is.
Yeah, and you go back to 2 years ago. Let's rewind real quick. You go back to going around this time, 2023. You were just coming off the really nice end to the 2022 season where you beat Tennessee, you beat Clemson, you nearly beat a good Notre Dame team in the Gator Bowl that year. You had some momentum, and then you went on and won 5 games in 23. Now, that's not the same vibe that I get with this season or this upcoming season, because you had a really better year, probably the best year of Shane Beamer's tenure at South Carolina by a long shot last season. It happened so many times now in program history. So to get that close and be in the playoff conversation, that's new territory for South Carolina in this era of college football that we're in right now. And like you said, Mike, there's a lot more expectations. And, Beamer realizes that, like, whatever they did in 2024 was good, but it can be even better. It can be great. So the level of standard that they have is being risen. The magnitude of, the way they did things last year, it's only going to go up. The bar is being set super high. And you can bet that this team is going to be ranked, I don't know, probably inside the top 15 in the preseason, rightfully so, because they had a great year. But that is because of what I just said. It was based on obviously recruiting, but also what they did last year. And we don't know what this team is going to look like throughout the season. They may be a top 15 team at the start of the year, and then they may fall, flat on their face. We don't know. Or they could rise to the occasion and prove the people right that are going to, really expect them to have another great year here. But again, I think it really depends on what you're getting from your portal guys. Shane mentioned a lot today. They need leaders to step up, and that's something that isn't necessarily like, snap your fingers and it's like it's going to happen. It takes time to develop that leadership, and I think we will see guys step up over time. But that's what I'm really interested in seeing is who are the early guys throughout the spring that become those leaders that can kind of guide you through the tough times of a long college football season.
And you need it in more ways than one, especially on the defensive side of the ball, because when you look at what they're losing, and I'm not even talking about losing a 2-time captain in Debo Williams at linebacker. I'm not even talking about a potential first-round draft pick with Nicky Manwuri at safety. I'm not even talking about a guy like Donald Fortune, who will likely be a draft pick as well, who was the MVP of the East-West Shrine game defensively. I'm not even talking about the fact that you have to replace over 1,500 snaps from just last season alone at the defensive tackle position. I'm not even talking about the fact that you got to replace the Gursky Award winner at defensive end with Kyle Kennard. I'm talking about the fact that you have so much vocal leaders that you need to replace, not just from a production standpoint, just that voice in that room. Demetrius Knight, and that was one thing that Beamer brought up earlier today. He said that if you go back to around last March during their grit night that they held, there was a period of time where Knight, a new guy, right, comes on in from Charlotte, and he addressed the team. He went up in front and he spoke to the team. And Beamer said, and I'm paraphrasing here, at that moment, listening to what Knight had to say, he knew that he was going to be one of the leaders. Who's going to do that this year? Now, there's leaders that do things in different ways. You don't always have to be the vocal leader. Lenora Sellers, from talking to people within the program, he's become more vocal, especially last season. He's become even more vocal this offseason. But you don't necessarily need to always have the vocal leader. There's leaders, even going back to when I played college ball, some really talented guys that end up playing in the NFL. They were by example. They just went out there, they handled their business. We've seen that in the past. So it's about trying to find guys who's going to be the vocal leaders, who's going to be the guys that just go out there and handle their business, and they're going to be able to follow suit. Because again, when you're losing as much talent as South Carolina is losing from a defensive standpoint, never mind the offensive side of the ball, you need that. I think the offense is going to be okay. I think certainly you need to be able to replace a big leader at the center position with Vershawn Lee, but you have Lenoris back there. Lenoris grew into a leader last year, certainly with that quarterback position, but he's going to have to grow into even a bigger leader this year, and other players too on the offensive side of the ball are going to have to step up as well.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Like, again, you're losing so much on this team to where guys are going to have to step up. And, most notably, I mean, like, defense aside, I think on offense, there's probably a lot of positions that you can look at. Tight end, Josh Simon, he's gone. Who fills that void? I think another spot, we got a question about it here, is running back. You're losing Rocket Sanders going into this season, and you have Oscar Attaway coming back. You have Rasul Faison coming in. You have the return of Matthew Fuller and Jawan Howell, who were both able to redshirt last year. But what are you getting out of those guys that can, is anyone going to be replacing Rocket 1-to-1? I don't think so. I think it's going to be more of a collective effort based on kind of what we saw in the bowl game. Gave us a little bit of a taste of that with Oscar getting the most touches. And then you get a little bit of, play time for Jawarn mainly, and Juju McDowell got in there a little bit. And I think Matthew Fuller got in there a little bit, but I might be remembering it a little bit wrong. But the point is, you're going to have to find a way to fill the void at the running back spot with what Rocket was able to do for you last year. And Shane was asked about what that might look like this year, and he had a lot of good things to say about Oscar, had some good things to say about Rasul. But, Mike, when you take what South Carolina has in the running back room this year compared to not having Rocket Sanders in there anymore, how difficult of a challenge might that be to fill that void?
It's difficult in the sense that, at least with Rocket, he had proved himself in the SEC. Now, he was coming back from an injury prior to coming to USC, but he had proven himself. And that there was at least some type of optimism knowing that, okay, this is a guy that has done it before. The question now is, what is he going to do when he gets an opportunity to go out there? Is he going to be the Rocket that we saw in 2022 when he was one of the top running backs in the SEC? What I would say heading into this season, Oscar Attaway, because of his role last year, I wouldn't get so caught up in the statistics of things. I wouldn't, because I think what I've seen this offseason is some people are like, well, I don't know if Oscar can do it because look what he did last year. What are you freaking talking about? I think if anything, what I saw from Oscar last year is I saw a guy that even when the offensive line struggled at times from a run blocking standpoint, it was very rare that Oscar didn't at least get back to the line of scrimmage. And the reason I bring that up is it's one of those things that gets overlooked. Here's a guy that his legs truly never stop. We hear that a lot with running backs. He runs the ball freaking hard. And I think what we saw against Illinois against in the Cheez-It Bowl, when he had that long run, you saw that you have a guy that can run between the tackles, but you also have someone that when he gets loose, he can break the big one. Now, the other things too that I like about Attaway is, and he proved it last year, he was certainly, even with Rocket in the mix, he was certainly their best pass blocker out of the running back position. And he was also one of their stronger receivers out of the backfield as well. He demonstrated that in the bowl game, but he demonstrated that throughout the season as well. So I think his role as a 3-down running back can certainly grow this year. Mike Shula certainly likes him from everything that I've been told inside of the building. But on top of that, you add in a new running back with Faison. He has experience as well. I mean, it's funny that we look at those two guys because those two guys have been in college for quite some time, right? I mean, both guys have been there. And I know Faison did the JUCO route a little bit too, but all together you add that up. I mean, it's about 6 years each, 7 years for some of these guys. So they have experience. The question now is, are they going to be able to produce the way that they need to? Because you need one of those guys to step up. After that, look, I'd love to see Howell be able to take that next step. I'd love to see Matthew Fuller take that next step. And I think that they're capable of having some tremendous careers in South Carolina, but you need one of those veteran backs. You need one of those veteran backs to take that next step. And I think because of the talent that Sellers has, it can alleviate some of that pressure at the running back position. But that only happens if two things, Jack. Offensive line's figured out. That interior, guard, center, right? And then also the wide receiver position. Who's going to step up? Because Josh Simon, yeah, he was a tight end last year. He's a tight end in general. But your tight end was your top receiver. You have to go all the way back to when Ryan Brewer played for South Carolina to find the last time a non-wide receiver led South Carolina in receiving. That's over 20-something freaking years ago. I don't even know if you were born yet, Jack.
I think I was, but
You
no,
were?
man,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm making you sound a little bit younger then. Okay.
Yeah, but
You'll
you're totally
appreciate it
right.
as you get older.
Yeah, but you're totally right, man. It's like they didn't have a true number one. They never felt like that at any point last year. Like you got flashes of Mazio having some good games. You had flashes of Nick Harbor. Honestly, kind of after the Alabama game, he really did step up as a nice little threat in the receiver room and made some nice catches. And Dale Von Campbell had some huge games down the road, especially against Missouri
Absolutely.
and Clemson. But you're going to have to find guys to step up, not just at tight end with, what does Brady Hunt look like this year? What does, Michael Smith look like this year?
And
then
by
at
the way,
receiver,
Jack,
yeah,
and Jack, sorry to cut you off, but for
you're good.
those who missed it earlier today, Shane Beamer shared that Michael Smith will be missing spring ball because of an injury. So that sets him back a little bit. I don't want to say that we should hit the panic button quite yet with that, but here's a guy that coming off of his freshman year, a lot of people are looking at Michael Smith to be the guy, and he can still be the guy. And hopefully Brady Hunt, a guy that did a lot of great things over at Ball State before he transferred in, dealt with the foot injury before coming in to USC. Hopefully he's able to get back to the Brady Hunt that was on the watch list for the Mackey a few years ago, one of the nation's top tight ends. You hope that can happen because you can't put all your eggs in one basket. And I think that's the point to the whole running back situation. You can't just look at Howell. You can't just look at Fuller and expect them to take that next step. It would be great if they could, but you're looking at the veteran guys. You're looking at, again, Attaway, a guy that has played at least in the SEC 1 year. Faison, who's played college football for many years, and he has a lot of experience and has had a lot of success. Those are the veteran guys you have to look at. It starts with them.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. Again, I think the one way to put it is that it's just spring ball. I don't know if that's the right way to put it,
Yep.
but also like you have the entire summer, you have preseason camp to get yourself back on track and get healthy for the season. So still such a long way to go. And speaking of the spring, man, there was one question asked today about the fact of, obviously around college football, there have been teams like Nebraska, other programs like that. Shane mentioned Nebraska today, so that's why I bring it up, in that they've canceled their spring games, right? I think Texas is another example that they're not playing spring games this year. Shane was adamant about the fact that they're absolutely going forward with a spring game. And it's not just about the fact, people are so worried about the tampering that goes on, but what is that going to really do? Not having a spring game is all of a sudden going to stop it? I don't think so. But the other side of it is that, it helps with recruiting, right? He said that they're, supposedly the only team playing on that Friday in April when they do have their spring game that night. And then it's also about getting fans in the building when, South Carolina normally has a pretty good crowd for these spring games. They usually fill up the lower bowl. And I don't think they really do much with the upper deck just because I don't know if they really want to or whatever. But the point is, they have a lot more to do with the spring game than just, playing the game. It's so much more than that.
And I understand that there's going to be a portion of this fan base, because I remember when it was announced, I wrote a story about it. There was a portion of this fan base very upset with scheduling it when they scheduled it. But if you look at it, okay, you have it on, say, Saturday, the day after, the day before Easter. You're probably going to lose a couple guys as far as coming to the game. because from a planning standpoint, well, if I come on a Saturday, then I'm going to have to fly back on Easter Sunday. That's just not going to happen. And being around South Carolina as long as I have, I'll be heading into my 10th year covering the program. There's never an ideal time really to have a spring game. And what I mean by that is this: with the success that Don Staley and the women's team has had over the last almost decade now at this point, knock on wood, but you expect them to be in the Final Four. And that Final Four weekend typically takes place that first week of April. Okay. Well, what happens usually that second week? The Masters goes on. And then, depending on when Easter plays out, sometimes you get for Easter a little bit early. This year it's a little bit later. It's pick your poison. Now, I also know that when it comes to spring games, you're working with trying to find out, okay, from a TV standpoint, what's going to work with their schedule so that you can broadcast the game and get it out there, all that kind of stuff, right? But I think with South Carolina, I think this is a great weekend because of, like I said, Masters is the week before. 2 weeks before that, South Carolina could be in the Final Four. Your fan base will be itching for something. Baseball's going on, softball's going on. We know that. But football going on at that point, weather's going to start to continue to get better. It certainly feels that way right now, but give it a month, it's going to feel even better. Those fans coming out there, and even if, and I always, I took a lot of heat a couple of years ago because I basically said it's a Gamecock measuring contest, if you know what I'm trying to get at, about putting out how many people are in the stands, because at the end of the day, who really cares what the announced attendance is? It's like little Susie in second grade guessing how many jelly beans are in the damn jar. It's never going to be accurate unless you actually pour it out. So no one's going to have a parade. I'm looking at Main Street right now. There's not going to be a parade down Main Street and at the steps here at the State House because there was X amount of people there. It's more so the environment that is created. And I've had a chance over the years to talk to some of the recruits who have gone to South Carolina spring game. And they're not looking around saying, wow, look how many people are here. No, they're saying, like, what an incredible atmosphere. Now, don't get me wrong. Okay, there's always going to be that one wise guy that's listening. Oh, Mike, what if there's only 100 people? You and I both know there's not just going to be 100 people. This game could be played at 2 a.m. on a Monday, Tuesday, whatever. There's going to be people there because this fan base, it truly is. And being back in New England, and I love covering some of the sports that I'm covering up there. But when it comes to college football down here, when they say it means more, it truly means more. And that's what you see, especially in Columbia when it comes to football. So it's the environment more than anything else, Shaq. And I think that's a big part. And that's another reason why, at least right now, unless Shane Beamer looks over things over the next couple of years and says, you know what, maybe it's just not a good idea to have a spring game. That's why he was so adamant about having a spring game, because it is it's one of their folks. It is one of their biggest weekends when it comes to recruiting. There's no question about that. And we've seen that in the past.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off that with two other things real quick. Number one, you mentioned the fact that, okay, there really isn't really a good time to run the spring game just because you mentioned the Final Four potentially, the Masters, baseball season's in the thick of things. Like people will still go to baseball, softball, whatever, and it's on a Friday this year, which is definitely tough. And from a recruiting standpoint, you'll get recruits in the building regardless. However, you're also going to have, as Shane pointed out today, you're going to have recruits coming to every single practice and stuff. So you'll have your opportunities to showcase to the recruits that are looking into South Carolina what USC is all
Jack,
about.
what did you say? And what did you say before we started getting into this? South Carolina, that Friday night, they're the only show in town.
Exactly.
They're the only show in town. So it makes it easier. It makes it easier for some of these prospects to say, hey, let's go to South Carolina. There's nothing else really going on. Let's go there on Friday night.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And you mentioned Friday night. A lot of these guys that, Shane mentioned before, how new this team looks and stuff. They're also going to have a lot of incoming freshmen joining the team that are looking to potentially make a huge impact this season. Well, they've never really played in front of huge crowds before, maybe outside of a state championship game or a high-level, big-time, regular season football match. I'm not sure. But the point is, that spring game, I think we can fully expect the lower bowl to probably be filled. I don't know about to capacity, but like you won't find many empty seats. That's going to be the biggest crowd that a lot of these kids play in, and he's only going to serve them well before having to go play in front of 70,000 or whatever Mercedes-Benz Stadium holds out in Atlanta for that season opener against Virginia Tech. So there's, in my opinion, and I know in yours too, Mike, there's so many more pros than
Oh
cons.
yeah.
Like if tampering's your reason you really don't want to have the spring game or whatever, like Beamer said, it's not like you don't know the players on the team. There are so many more benefits to doing this, and not to mention the fact that the city reaps in all the rewards of having, hotels. People will come from wherever for these games, and the food and all that. There's just so much that makes sense to continue doing this game.
I know that there's a lot of coaches throughout the country that pride themselves on attention to detail, but being able to put your players in a situation, as you alluded to, there's so many new faces, there's so many young players that aren't used to playing in front of even the type of crowd that they would play in a spring game, for crying out loud. I mean, shoot, I remember Oscar Attaway last year. Let's use Oscar. We were talking about him a little while ago, sharing that the spring game last year, that's like the most people he's ever played in front of, and he was coming from North Texas. No disrespect to the Mean Green, Shout out to the great Joe Green, Mean Joe Green. But when you have an opportunity to do something like that, it helps you because one of my favorite quotes, and I think I probably have said this to you, Jack. I have a plaque of it because I remember my college coach would always say it by Mike Tyson. Everyone has a game plan until you get punched in the face. Being able to put your guys out there in a situation where they're able to be more acclimated to what game day will be like. And certainly when you're playing in front of whether it be 25,000, 40,000, whatever the case may be, it's not going to give you a true representation of what game day will be like when you're playing in front of 80,000. We understand that. But at the same time, too, even if you're a school that played in front of, say, 10,000 in high school, right? 15,000. It's much different when you're in a stadium that holds 80,000. You have the Jumbotron going on. You're going to be playing at night. You have the light show going on. You're able to get used to all this so that when game day does happen, it's not going to be one of those things where you're just like, oh my goodness, wow, this is off. No, you're going to be prepared. And certainly South Carolina does that leading up to the season. They'll have scrimmages inside the stadium. They'll have practices inside the stadium. They'll do that throughout the course of spring periodically. But to go out there and have a game where the coaches are on the sideline, they're not there holding your hand. Clayton White has talked about it before in the past. I'm not out there on the field with them anymore. If there's a check that they need to make, they're on their own now. They can't just look at me and be like, Coach, what do I got to do? Because guess what? Once the season starts, once week one happens out in Atlanta against Virginia Tech, Clayton White's not going to be there. Mike Shula's not going to be there on the offensive side of the ball. The bullets are flying, and you have to be able to make those adjustments on your own.
Yeah, it's going to be tough, and that's what comes with football, man. Like you have all this time to prepare and stuff, and I understand why some schools may not want to do the spring game and stuff. You don't want to give too much away. You don't want to, I don't know, the whole players tampering thing. I think that's just a little bit of, I don't know. I just think it helps South Carolina in this case continuing forward with the spring game and all that good stuff. Mike, before we flip the page over to a little bit of basketball talk real quick, you have any final thoughts from anything Shane said, anything looking forward to ahead to tomorrow with Pro Day?
I think more than anything is how some of these guys look with their positional drills, right? Because for a guy like Nicky Manwari, what more can he really do? Right? What more can he really do? I think what's going to come down to is whether or not Nick will be the first safety picked in the draft or if he'll be the second. He'll definitely be one of the top two. What we've seen before in the past are these guys that will come out and they will have an opportunity to work out in front of some head coaches. We don't know the list yet. So as we do this show on Monday, the day before Pro Day, we don't know who will be out there. But what I can say, Jack, and I know I was talking to you about this a little bit earlier, with the number of players who were at the NFL Combine, you had 11. And as ESPN insider Field Yates and I discussed a few weeks ago in a story that we did on Gamecock Central, the number of players that South Carolina will likely have drafted this year should new record. That record right now is 7. They've done that twice. That goes back to the days of Alshon Jeffrey. That goes back to the days of DJ Swearinger, right? That goes back to a very, very talented era of football. We've seen a lot of talented guys come through, but USC has a chance to do something that they've never done before. And I think when you have that combined with the fact that Georgia had their pro day a week ago, Alabama has their pro day on Wednesday, when you look at it, and I remember back in 2019 when Debo and Hayden Hurst were coming out, Bill Belichick came on through, and then he ended up going, I think it was Alabama or Georgia the next day. From a geographical standpoint, it would make sense for a lot of these head coaches who want to come out and see some of these guys to come to South Carolina tomorrow, because they can come here and they can shoot on over to Alabama. The only other big one, and shout out to our coworker, Kevin Miller, who gathered this information earlier today. The only other big one going on tomorrow is Oregon. But Oregon, of course, is out on the West Coast. Head coach or two could be a player that are very interested, and they can shoot on over to Alabama, because Alabama typically there's a lot of head coaches. But then again, this will be the first pro day without Nick Saban, I believe. I don't know if Saban was there last year for his pro day, for the pro day. I don't remember exactly when he retired.
I don't think so.
Getting some brain fog. But the point being is it's still new, right? We're not used to Nick not being there, so we're still seeing a coach go through. So I don't know. I think there's going to be a lot of guys, not just scouts, but head coaches in Columbia on Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be. I'm really interested to see just how packed it is, I guess is the right word to put it, with how many scouts, GMs, like you said, head coaches probably will be there too. Times are changing for South Carolina football in a good way, and we'll see what happens tomorrow. Again, we will be providing all coverage and updates on GamecockCentral.com throughout the day, and there'll be plenty of stories and footage and videos to come from tomorrow. Now, shifting gears to basketball, the elephant in the room, South Carolina men's basketball declined an invitation to the NIT on Sunday, and this was something that I wrote about a little bit on Gamecock Central the other day. Should they or should they not accept a bid if it is there for the taking? There were some good reasons why they should take it. You get more guys experience. You play more games. At the same time, though, you have to focus on your future and not making mistakes in the portal, not swinging and missing on anything. And this is such a critical offseason going into what will be year 4 of Lamont Paris's tenure at South Carolina. So, Mike, I know I'm not surprised they declined the invitation, but are you, and what are just your thoughts in general on specifically the statement that we've talked about it a little bit, that Lamont Paris put out about the whole situation?
Yeah, so I was asked last night from someone on Twitter, just my thoughts, and I try to be respectful, but at the same time too, I mean, people aren't stupid. People aren't dumb. Let's call a spade a spade. And as I said on social media last night, my truthful, honest opinion, I don't blame South Carolina for declining the invite. You look at LSU, the other SC team who was invited to the NIT, they also turned it down. The only thing that I wish they would have done differently is I wish they would have just said, hey, look, we're going to focus on recruiting and getting this program back to where it needs to be next year. Even if they don't want to say that, okay. But there was just no reason, in my opinion, to throw in the part that they're dealing with injuries. And that was part of the reason. It's just like, come on. Are guys banged up? I'm sure. Are there some injuries that maybe we're not aware of? And when I say we're not aware of, because Jack, as you remember, I reached out to you. I reached out to multiple reporters who have been covering the team and been there every step of the way, because I felt like it would have been irresponsible of me to have the type of answer that I had last night without reaching out and talking to some of the reporters who have been there all season and have been around the team. And that's why I had the response that I did, which was there's no reason to put that out there. There's just none. Let's say that there's a player or two that we don't know that is banged up. Guess what? This time of the year, everyone's banged up in some shape, way, or form. Every player. I mean, there's teams that I'm covering right now up in the Rhode Island area, and they're getting ready for March Madness. And they're banged up. And guess what? They're going to be ready to go. Why? Because it's March Madness. So, let's not – come on. If they had to play, they would have played. And I think that's the only thing that bothered me with that is spare me. Spare all of us with the, oh, well, we're banged up a little bit, the injury. Stop it. Stop it. You could have suited up. A team could have suited up and played. Spare me with that. Come on.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Mike, it's been great having you on. I know you said you had to get running, so definitely appreciate your time, man. And yeah, definitely we'll have to get you back on soon. We'll have pro day tomorrow and stuff, so I know you'll be there. And really looking forward to seeing all your great coverage over on Gamecock Central.
And I appreciate it, and I appreciate everyone bearing with me here with the shaky Wi-Fi connection. Using the hotspot right now. You think I could have got the
It's
Wi-Fi
about as
connection
good
at
as it can
Halls?
be right now. It's about as good as it can be right now.
I appreciate it. Yeah, looking forward to pro day tomorrow. 25 Gamecocks, and also too, this is pretty neat. Shout out to Luedecke and everything that strength and conditioning staff have done, especially over the last year in particular. Because as Shane Beamer alluded to earlier today, the job that they have done, it was on full display out in Indy at the NFL Combine. Not just with Nick Eamon, where we start with multiple players, and it will certainly be on display tomorrow. And I think that's another reason why you will see so many teams out there to watch South Carolina players. And guess what? That benefits some of the guys who weren't at pro day.
Yeah.
Whether it be in, this is my dark horse, Dalvin Campbell. I think he could be a guy that could earn an opportunity, even if he doesn't get drafted, because it's not just the size he has and the hands that he has, what he did from a special team standpoint. So watch out for a guy like Campbell if he has a good pro day. And I also think, too, a guy like Hunter Rogers, a guy like Kai Kroger, guys that those specialist positions, those are the toughest spots in football to be able to land with the team, because unlike quarterback, running back, receiver, or offensive line, they don't keep backups more times than not on practice squad. And the reason being is because, well, why are you going to do that? Unless someone's hurt and you have to, get fancy with the roster. But yeah, I'm eager. I think this could be arguably one of the best pro days we've seen in a long time. That says a lot with all the talent that's come through Columbia.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun tomorrow, and we'll have all coverage on GamecockCentral.com. So we're going to roll on with the show. But Mike, appreciate you hopping on as always, and we'll catch up again soon.
Yes, sir. You take care.
All right, thanks, Mike. And that was Mike Uva, of course, needs no introduction from GamecockCentral.com. Appreciate him tuning in and for a little bit here to talk some football with me, about what Shane Beamer had to say during his spring football media availability to kick off the spring practice, which start on Wednesday, pro day tomorrow for USC. That is closed to the public, so media will be there and stuff, but we will be providing all coverage on GamecockCentral.com. And then practice starts on Wednesday, and it's football for a month after that. So going to be a lot of fun having that. But continuing the conversation real quick about men's basketball, sharing a little bit more of my thoughts. Again, appreciate Mike's insight. And him and I agree a lot on this. Like my quick thoughts just in general, the statement was fine from Lamont Paris outside of the fact if he didn't include the word injuries in there, because you and I all well know that if you've watched this team long enough this season and kept up with the injury reports and stuff that the SEC posts every single game, South Carolina has only had one consistent injury throughout SEC play, and that is Miles Studi, who had the blood clot, played against Mississippi State that first game of SEC play. Then that was it. Missed the final 18 games. So, point being, yes, nicks and bruises are a thing. CMB definitely had his share of those with the cut lip, the thumb, all that stuff. But to our knowledge, there was nothing else really that serious, obviously, that warranted, number one, being on the injury report, and number two, using that as a, let's call it for what it is, an excuse for why you're not playing in the NIT. I have no problem with the fact that they decided to decline the bid. I think it would have been not that it's a waste of time, but it would have take you wouldn't be able to put all your intention on the bigger issues at hand. And when you go 12-20 in a season, you should not be fooling around playing in a tournament that, let's call it what it is, meaningless in a sense, because what does South Carolina have to gain from playing in the NIT other than giving guys more experience and playing more games, competing for a championship? I mean, I guess if you want to call it that, but at the end, it's like it's no better than playing in a non-playoff bowl game in football, right? Like, yes, you get more experience, and yes, you have to play that game more times than not, unless you're going to be a team that doesn't have enough guys to play. That's the other thing I would have worried about with this. Let's say South Carolina did accept the bid to the NIT. Would they have enough guys to compete? Like, how do we know half the roster isn't thinking about just entering the transfer portal right now, or a bunch of guys are moving on? What? How do we not know that? So I think roster attrition is something that Paris did mention in his statement, which is not an issue. Totally understandable. Injuries, though, that's kind of where I'm like, you didn't need to include that. You could have lived without putting that part in there. But again, it's totally understandable that they're not competing in the NIT, and neither is LSU. The only two SEC teams that had bids to go play in this tournament. And I also think it's not even just a South Carolina thing. I mentioned this on 107.5 The Game this morning. I think it's also just an SEC thing in general, to where this is the first year where the SEC is getting, to my knowledge, they're getting auto bids like they are this year. So the ACC and the SEC would have gotten two automatic bids. And in this case, because 14 teams made the NCAA tournament, that left South Carolina and LSU as the only two options to go play in the NIT. And if South Carolina and LSU were to be one and done, bounced in the first round, then you deal with the criticism and scrutiny that comes with the fact of, oh, you're giving this conference automatic bids even though they're putting really bad teams in and they lose first round. How is that fair? Because at the end of the day, I feel like this is more of a mid-major tournament than anything. Like teams that, because mid-majors typically only get about one, they get the automatic bid with the conference championship, and every now and then you'll get another mid-major team in from a conference, and that's two bids. But that doesn't happen for everyone. Typically, from my understanding, it's the regular season champion from that conference in a mid-major gets to go to the NIT if they don't win the conference tournament. So you see what I'm saying? Like, this is much more about the mid-majors and the other teams that got screwed out of a spot in the NCAA tournament. And in South Carolina's case, they had no business being in the NCAA tournament. So, or the NIT for that matter. So I think it's good to kind of just focus on the future here and see what happens. Again, I think South Carolina is doing the right thing here to give 100% of their focus to having the end of season meetings, which they still apparently need to have, and then also just focusing on making sure they hit on what they need to in the transfer portal, because this is going to be a massive offseason for South Carolina. And if things don't go right, if they don't hit on their pickups they're going to be going after, their targets, it could be another year where it's like the SEC isn't going to get any worse. They're going to continue to be very good. And if not, you're finding yourself in a situation where you have to have these discussions again next year. And potentially, if it's this bad with another dead last finish in the SEC, I mean, think about it. If South Carolina is this bad again next year, that's 3 of 4 years under Paris that have been really bad for South Carolina. Like, the first year is whatever. Like, I don't really blame anyone for that, because it's the first year with a new roster. You had so much going on, new coach, new players, Gigi Jackson at the top. I mean, it's just a lot was happening in year one. Then year two was great, but this year was really bad. And you just hope next year they can kind of get right back on track, which is definitely possible. But again, you must make good on the players you bring in. Bring the best players in possible, not just best players in general. Of course, you can try to do that, but the players that are going to best fit what you're trying to accomplish. Like, you need better guards. You need probably going to have to replace, CMB, and you have to replace some other key pieces on this team. And you also have to figure out, okay, who's coming back and who's going to leave, because you can't run it back with the same roster. I fear that is just not going to fly going into next season, because this roster clearly finishing 2-16 in the SEC and dead last overall in the conference, that it's not cut out to win consistently. So that's all I really have to say on that. And I do hope that this offseason is good for South Carolina, and it is good to see that they are putting their full focus on getting better for the 2025-26 season. Now, on the flip side in basketball, the women's team for South Carolina will be continuing on their season as a number 1 seed in the upcoming NCAA tournament. The number 2 overall seed, though, I will say, not the number 1 overall seed, because that title went to UCLA, which I was talking about last week with Kendall Smith. We have this discussion. Would South Carolina or UCLA be the top seed in the NCAA tournament? Well, because of the head-to-head, like if there was any sort of tiebreaker or any discussion that needed to be had, I did say I thought, okay, it would probably be the head-to-head matchup you had all the way back in November out in Los Angeles. Right or wrong, I don't think that's the right way to look at it. But if it is too close to call, I understand why the committee went the way they did, putting UCLA as the top overall seed. Now, does it really matter too much in the grand scheme of things? No, I think South Carolina's path to the Final Four is there for them. They'll start out on Friday at 4:00 p.m. on ESPN as a 42.5-point favorite playing Tennessee Tech. That's a game South Carolina should win relatively easily, no problem. Get your seniors out there, get the players that don't play a ton, even though I feel like the roster, a lot of these players do play a lot, but get everyone some action on the floor. Then you assume they make it to the round of 32. You have a potential rematch set up with Indiana, who you faced in last year's tournament, or you face Utah in the second round. And then after that, you got the Sweet 16, Elite 8, some of the other teams that are notably in this region, which is set up to go to Birmingham for the second weekend. You have Alabama taking on Green Bay in the 5-12 matchup. You have Maryland taking on Norfolk State in the 4 versus 13. You have West Virginia, who will take on whoever wins the first 4 bout for the 11th seed. Then you have North Carolina taking on Oregon State, Vanderbilt taking on Oregon in the 7-10 matchup, and then to round things out, Duke taking on Lehigh in the 2 versus 15. And no, this is not Duke versus Lehigh from, I think, what was it, like 2012 when CJ McCollum and Lehigh beat Duke back in the NCAA tournament in the first round, coincidentally in a 2 versus 15 matchup. But I thought that was just a funny coincidence right there. So I think the path looks pretty clear for South Carolina to get to Tampa for the Final Four. And for better or for worse, you get to play potentially Texas in that Final Four bout, which I think would be a really interesting matchup for South Carolina, considering they've already played 3 times this year. And who knows? I mean, they've also won the coin flip this year. So far, 3-1 against the Longhorns, but obviously it starts with Tennessee Tech on Friday, and then you face off against Utah or Indiana in the second round if you can make it through the round of 64, which we definitely expect South Carolina to do, I would say. So going to be very interesting to see what happens. But again, nothing too crazy there that UCLA got the number 1 overall seed, South Carolina, the second top seed in this tournament. And they've had a great year, and we will see what happens there. So again, all that starts on Friday afternoon, 4 p.m. on ESPN. The quest to make it back-to-back titles, it begins now here in March. All right, last but not least, it is time to talk about the second elephant in the room. This was going to be probably the main topic of discussion yesterday if I had gone live for Sunday Reset, which again, apologies that we're doing this a day later. The game, baseball yesterday was just very, very, I don't know how to describe that game yesterday. An utter meltdown, a disaster. In case you missed it, South Carolina lost a 3-game series in baseball to number 12 Oklahoma over the weekend out at Founders Park. And this was a series that game 1, South Carolina lost 8-5. They fell behind early. Brandon Stone got rocked in the first inning, gave up 4 runs, managed to pitch through 5 innings. He gave South Carolina a chance, and the bats did wake up a little bit in the middle innings against Kyson Witherspoon, who, I mean, my goodness, he's electric. And he has a twin brother who also pitched on Saturday that we'll get into in a little bit here. But I mean, the dude was throwing 96, 97 consistently, which is very much different from the type of speed of velocity that South Carolina had been facing in midweek matchups and all that stuff. So I think for South Carolina, they were eventually able to get to Witherspoon in the middle innings, had a 4-run inning to cut what was a 7-1 game down to 7-5. But the Gamecocks could never cut it any closer as Oklahoma got another run in the late innings and was able to hold on for an 8-5 win on Friday. Is what it is. You move to game 2. South Carolina bounced back in a nice response with an 11-5 win. Jake McCoy gave up 4 runs in his outing over 5 innings, but he managed to pick up the win. Threw 104 pitches, by the way, too, which is also very impressive. Okay, yes, he only made it through 5 innings, but all things considered, against a really solid lineup like this, and he also walked 3 batters and struck out 6. It is what it is, but he also had some nice support from his offense that did score 11 runs and had the fourth inning with 3 runs, and then the 5th with 4 runs to get you up to 11 by the end of the game. And very impressive from South Carolina. Oklahoma did not play clean defense, made 3 errors, and almost every starter in the lineup picked up at least 1 hit. Kennedy Jones had a huge game with 3 hits and hit a home run that I don't know if it's landed yet. And KJ Scobie. What more can you say about him hitting in the 4-hole behind Ethan Petrie? I just wrote a story on GamecockCentral.com with my weekend recap, which is premium for subscribers on the website. But if you want to take more of a look into it, I'll share a little detail. I do think KJ needs to be your cleanup hitter moving forward. I just think it makes all the sense in the world. And it was a very productive game for him as he went 1 for 4 and had a long, very long, I believe 439-foot home run into left field for a solo shot in the 2nd inning on Saturday. So good win for South Carolina there. Tyler Pitzer picked up the save. Wasn't pretty. 4 innings, no runs given up, 1 run, but it wasn't earned. 6 strikeouts and 5 walks. So the walks were an issue, but again, South Carolina was able to pick up a nice bounce back, convincing win with Malachi Witherspoon, twin brother, identical twin of Tyson Witherspoon, taking the loss and starting on the mound. And then Sunday, I mean, this game was just, what more can you say? I'm not even going to jump right into the beginning. I'll start at the end, man. 5-3 game, 1 out in the 9th. Brendan Sweeney, who had been pitching great so far, gives up a walk. No big deal, right? 1 runner on, no problem. There's a series of misplays in the inning that we're going to start diving into now. There's a ball hit to Henry Kazmar at short. Tries backhanding it. It was a hard hit ball that if he gets a glove on, he could potentially get a force out at second at least, and at best turn a double play to end the game. However, he couldn't get a glove on it. Went into left field, and it was a hit. Then later in the inning, there was a ground ball hit to the shift with Jordan Carry-On in the grass in the outfield, shallow right field. Got a glove on it, but booted the ball, and it rolled away from him and went down the line, and a run scores for Oklahoma. And then South Carolina, actually, I meant to say right before that, had a chance to turn another potential double play on a slowly hit ground ball towards short, and Jackson Willis for Oklahoma beat the throw out to first to keep the game alive. And then, like I said, Carry-On had the misplay at second base. And then there was another play in the later stage of that top of the 9th where there was a ball hit up the middle. It went between Carry-On and Kazmar. Carry-On somewhat got a glove on it, but it rolled away from him. It was going to be a tough play anyway. A run would have scored. So Oklahoma ties the game at 5. Blown save is what it is. You try to respond in the bottom of the 9th, which, again, I don't think this was on Sweeney at all. He did his job. Again, South Carolina's defense has been great this year, specifically Carry-On. And at times, Kazmar's been pretty good with the glove, especially lately. I know he hasn't been great this year, but he's been pretty solid on defense. And again, Carry-On's been very strong too. So it was a little bit of a surprise to see this defense make a few mistakes in the late going here. And then no runs in the bottom of the ninth. And then Jason Walk for Oklahoma, the leadoff hitter for that team, hits a go-ahead solo home run that proved to be the difference. And that was the game. And a 6-5 loss that really should have never happened. Again, South Carolina, despite all the mistakes that happened in that top of the ninth, I still think they shouldn't have even been in that position. Like, with or without the defense being what it was, you should have had a bigger lead going into that inning, because there were some missed opportunities. You went 4 for 20 with runners on base, and you went 2 for 11 with runners in scoring position. And specifically in the seventh and eighth inning, with the bases loaded. The bases loaded were in the eighth, and you had Ethan Petrie get an RBI on a hit by pitch, and then Talmadge LeCroy popped up to end the inning. And then in the inning before that, you got lucky with Ethan Petrie scoring from third on a wild pitch. And mind you, right before that, Jace Woida hit a ball that probably would have been fielded by the second baseman for probably the final out of the inning, but it hit off the umpire, ricocheted, went into center field. Petrie goes first to third, and then the wild pitch happens, and then South Carolina scores the run there to take the lead for what we felt like would have been for good going into the ninth inning, but alas, things happen. So South Carolina does drop the series. They moved to 1-2 on the year in SEC play, and they're 16-5 overall, 21 games into the season. I mean, how do you feel about this team right now? I think it's a valid question to ask, because have they really proven themselves yet? Like, think about it this way. Outside of the midweek games and the non-conference series early in the year against your Milwaukees, your Morehead States, your Sacred Hearts, you really haven't done much. Like, you've had a few nice little comeback victories, but again, it was against lower tier mid-major competition. The big series against top 10 teams currently in Clemson and Oklahoma, you've gone 1-5 against those teams. Like, outside of Saturday, what have you really done? You got swept by Clemson, didn't play particularly great that weekend outside the pitching being pretty good, but your hitting didn't show up really much at all in that series. And this weekend, I thought South Carolina played well enough to win the series for sure. Obviously, given that Sunday, they should not have lost that game, but they did it to themselves. They're sitting at 1-5 in meaningful games, and it's only going to get tougher from here, because everyone, I'm sure, thinks midweeks are going to be easy. You have 2 really tough ones coming up. You have Charleston tomorrow at Segra Park. I'll be back there providing all coverage and updates on GamecockCentral.com, of course. And then, next week, after what's going to be I think a really tough series, going to Fayetteville to face number 3 Arkansas this weekend, which I'll be there for. You have a midweek game in Charlotte against number 17 North Carolina, a team that, yes, they've lost a little bit of talent, but they went to Omaha last year. Like, this is a very good, proud baseball program. And then also, to top it all off, to round out this 8-game stretch that I think is really going to – it's early, but it honestly, it's kind of almost the halfway point. It will define your season, what happens over these next 8 games. You round it out with a weekend series next weekend at home, fortunately, against the defending champs, the top-ranked team in college baseball, who I think is far and ahead of every other team in this game right now, number 1 Tennessee. And I remember going to Rocky Top last year and seeing how things went for South Carolina against a very good team last year that went on to win it all, that I think can do it again this year. Tennessee could very well come into Columbia and sweep this series next weekend if South Carolina is not playing a little bit better, which, I mean, honestly, I don't know how things are going to go this week. I personally could see a way in which you go. I'm not saying you're going to go 0-8 over these next 8 games. I mean, I'm not going to say that. I think South Carolina will at least win a game. I expect them to win tomorrow against Charleston, though. If you do remember going back to the fall, they had that scrimmage out in Charleston at Joseph Riley Park. It was a high-scoring game. Scrimmage doesn't really matter. You played random guys. You pitched some other guys. Charleston takes that stuff seriously, and they were men on a mission, because They wrongfully got left out of the NCAA tournament last year after winning, I think, 41 games. I mean, they have Chad Holbrook has done a tremendous job with that program out in CHS. Don't think for a second that the Cougars are not having that. Like, they have a lot to play for tomorrow, and they're going to be taking that game fully serious. And it's on South Carolina to do the same. I'm not saying they don't; they obviously do. But South Carolina's got to come out here playing like their life depends on it, because the last thing you want to do is go into Arkansas this weekend. What I hear is one of the craziest environments in college baseball against one of the top teams in the country, let alone one of the better teams, honestly, in the regular season. The postseason is a whole different discussion. But regular season-wise, Arkansas is as tough as it gets. And I just don't think you can really afford to lose this game tomorrow to Charleston. It would help your resume if you win this game, obviously, because Charleston's a great team. And then Arkansas, I think – best case scenario, you find a way to win one game. I think you feel good about that, because the rule of thumb has always been, for me at least, I know for a lot of people, don't get swept on the road and win your series at home. You failed one of those tasks this past weekend against against Oklahoma, losing that series at home. But you go to Arkansas this weekend, you find a way to win a game. Not bad. You'd like to win a series at Arkansas, but that is going to be tremendously tough. And then next week, North Carolina is going to be a really tough challenge. That is going to be a tough game. It's in Charlotte. South Carolina has fared decently well there before. They won a tough game against North Carolina last year out in Charlotte around this time of year. And that was a very good North Carolina team that South Carolina beat last year, which I think was a 2-1 game, if I'm not mistaken. But then you get Tennessee next weekend, and it's at home. That is a benefit. It's one thing to go to Tennessee, go to Knoxville at Lindsey Nelson Stadium and try to play there. But to have this series at home next weekend, you hope by that point, I would say realistically, you hope you're 3-2. Take the midweek games, which are going to be tough. I would not be surprised if South Carolina lost both of them. I would not be surprised, honestly, if South Carolina was 0-5 over these next 5 games going into the Tennessee series, just because it's not because South Carolina is a bad team. I just think these teams they are playing coming up are really freaking good. Again, Charleston's a great team. Arkansas, nothing more to be said. Great team. North Carolina, I feel the same way about them. Tennessee, nothing more to be said. It's going to be tough. You find a way to go 500 or better, I think that is a massive win, and you stay afloat. And you got Mississippi State after that. You got A&M coming up after that. 2 really tough road trips, but 2 teams that just got swept this weekend. And again, it's so early to where Florida got swept this weekend. Like I said, State got swept this weekend. A&M got swept. Like, there are going to be games. Ole Miss lost 2 of 3 against Arkansas. These teams that are losing series are getting swept right now, and it's only one weekend in the SEC. They will probably figure it out eventually. South Carolina, they played well enough to win the series this weekend, which I think gives you confidence that they can go out here and beat some teams for sure. They're not a bad team at all. I don't think South Carolina is a bad team by any metric or anything right now. But what I will say is they are in danger of if they don't come up and show up to play over these next 8 games, they could definitely fall into a deep hole, and it might be a little bit tough to get out of, especially like if you get swept this weekend, 1-5, you get swept next weekend, that's 1-8 to open SEC play. Do I think it's going to happen? No. I think you could potentially go 3-3. I think that is a fair estimation. But again, it is going to be tough against these really, really strong teams. You're playing, potentially, I mean, Charleston's not ranked, but you're playing 7 of your next 8 games are against ranked teams. It's going to be very tough. But again, we'll see what happens. So they got one question here from EXO, and then we're going to head on out of here after a very long but productive stream today. EXO says, I didn't like the vibe / body language in the press conference. Saturday we won, but the guys looked like we lost. That was odd. It's not the first time they seemed in a funk after a win. What's with that? I'm not sure, to be honest. And it's not easy for me to say necessarily because I was not covering Saturday's game. That was my day off. And Sunday I was back at the ballpark, but I can tell you, like, it just looked very dejected. As soon as South Carolina blew that lead in the ninth inning, I'll speak to that from just being there. They looked very dejected as soon as that lead was blown. And you hear it in Pulmonary talking to him after the game. I mean, I don't know. I think something's got to change, and it all starts at the top. Like, you have not. I'm not saying fire the coach or anything. Like, it's not what I'm saying here. But what I am saying is, though, what your coach does, inspiring confidence and, all that sort of stuff, being a great leader, which I think Maneri definitely can be for this team. That's what it comes down to. So if South Carolina is going to get it right, and they're going to get back on track again, make it one weekend, and that's it. Really, it's 2 weekends now where you haven't really played your best baseball. You looked bad against Clemson. You looked all right against Oklahoma, but you still were bad in some aspects of where, good teams don't blow games the way South Carolina did this past weekend. Like, that game on Sunday, inexcusable to blow a game like that with one out in the ninth inning. And it's easier said than done going out there and, doing what you have to do to win the game. But there were multiple opportunities in that ninth inning to close it out and pick up a 5-3 win potentially, or at worst 5-4 win. So we'll see. I mean, I think I'm not saying it's early. We're 21 games into the season now. We're definitely over a month into the season. Got to get things going here. And you hope South Carolina is able to pick up a big win tomorrow against Charleston, 6:30 p.m., SEC Network Plus at Segra Park. All updates on GamecockCentral.com. And that will take you into the weekend where you play a really talented Arkansas team that just won a series out at Swayze against the Ole Miss Rebels. So we'll see what happens. A lot of season left to go. And also shout out softball for picking up a massive series win over the Georgia Bulldogs this weekend out at Beckham Field. And we're definitely going to be planning on covering more softball, of course, throughout the season. And looking forward to seeing what the ladies do next out at Beckham Field. So that is going to do it for now for Gamecock Central Live, this latest edition. We hit on a lot of topics today. Football for the first 35 minutes or so with Mike Yuva, of course. A little bit of men's basketball talk with the NIT in the offseason ahead. Obviously, women's basketball being a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. And to wrap things up, the baseball weekend that was and what is to come. So I'll be back again sometime this week, probably on Wednesday, talking with Kendall Smith about all things going on in Gamecock athletics, probably some football since that will be day 1 of spring practice for South Carolina. And then I'll be talking with my guy, former South Carolina right-handed pitcher, Ethan Carter, to preview the weekend ahead as the Gamecocks, after the Charleston game, look forward to a trip to Fayetteville to take on the Arkansas Razorbacks. So appreciate all of you guys tuning in for this very long edition of GC Live. I appreciate it, and I will see you guys again soon. Have a great rest of your week, and until next time, take care, everyone. Bye.